I knew the house wasn't my daughter's the moment I stepped in. The rooms were beautiful in the way a hotel lobby is beautiful. Cold, expensive, forgettable. Marble that never warmed, art that never meant anything, chairs that looked like they'd scold you for sitting. Adrian called it minimal. I called it a stage. They put me at the far end of the table, closest to the wall, farthest from the laughs. That's where you seat the old man you want to forget. I didn't mind. From there, I could see the front door, the patio glass, and everyone's hands. Old habits don't retire. They just get quieter. Adrian was wearing his promotion like a second suit. Senior partner at 35. He smiled the way a billboard smiles. Too even, too perfect, for someone who still has a pulse. Leela floated beside him, pleasant and pale, topping off glasses, adjusting napkins, apologizing with her eyes for things no one could name. When she brushed my shoulder, I caught the perfume her mother used to wear. Memory can be a kind of mercy. It can also be a knife. Adrian loves timing. He let the chatter thin out until you could hear the silver-touch porcelain and the air hum. Then he lifted his glass. To precision, he said. The difference between winning and almost. His partners chuckled. The way partners do when the youngest in the room says he's inevitable. He worked the table like a good attorney works a jury. Light jokes for the easy ones. Flattery for the vain ones. A small, soft dig for the ones who might bite back later. When his gaze fell on me, it didn't land. It skimmed like I was a detail in a contract he'd already redlined. Edward, he called down the table, you keeping busy in retirement? Or finally learning to nap like the rest of us hope to at your age? Polite laughter, the kind people do with their mouths closed. I took a sip of water and nodded as if considering the question. I keep my hands from rusting, I said. That's enough, he smiled bigger. Well, Lila says you've always been an industrious man. Stubborn too. She gets that from me, I said. He moved on before I finished the sentence. That's how he does it. Never stays long enough for your words to live. He talks over the end of you. Dinner was some elaborate fish that tasted like a meeting. I ate it because I was raised to finish what was put in front of me. I watched Lila laugh at punchlines that had no jokes. I watched the guests keep their faces in a safe middle. You can tell a lot about a room by how it avoids a subject. Tonight, the subject was me. When the plates were cleared, Lila came out with dessert, and the room softened. Chocolate cake. The good one. The recipe that came out on birthdays, promotions, and the kind of days you need to believe the world still had sweetness in it. I didn't look up, because if I looked at my daughter then, I'd remember the kid who used to lick frosting from the whisk and leave a smear on my cheek like a signature. She cut me a thick slice. For luck, she said, and her voice cracked on the K. Adrian kept performing. He was telling a story about a difficult client, the kind who reminded him of a certain older gentleman at the table. Everyone looked anywhere but at me. He gestured wide with his glass to sell the climax, and his cuff clipped my wrist. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it wasn't. The plate pivoted, skated, and dropped. The cake hit marble with a wet, heavy slap. Cream and crumbs spread like a small map of failure. A partner's wife put a hand to her mouth. Someone murmured, "Oh no!" Lila froze. I could hear the air leave her. Adrian stared at the mess for a beat too long, then lifted his glass again, eyes bright, voice warm enough to burn. "If you want dinner," he said, "you'll have to lick it off the floor." There was that nervous laugh again, thinner this time. It died fast. The room waited to see what I would do, because when someone breaks a rule, everyone else wants to be told what happens next. I didn't look at the floor. I didn't look at Lila. I smoothed my jacket. Old hands can still make a clean line. I pushed my chair back slow so the legs wouldn't squeal and make a scene for me. Then I walked the length of the table, past the heavy centerpiece, the poured wine, the plates waiting for a cue until I was close enough to see the pause on Adrian's nose and the faint sweat at his hairline. He smiled like a referee would fix this in a minute. "Edward, I know everything," I said, not loud, not theatrical. Just close enough that he could feel the words more than hear them. The color washed out of his face so fast it looked like someone had unplugged him. He blinked, he calculated. He tried to decide which everything I meant. That's what men like Adrian are afraid of. Not the truth, but the size of it. Behind me, a fork tapped a plate. Someone coughed into a linen napkin. Lila swallowed a sound and turned it into a smile for the table. She learned that from living with him, how to make grief polite. Adrian wet his lips. "Everything is a lot," he said, too lightly, and the lightness broke in the middle. I said. "It is." I stepped back, gave the room the kind of nod you give a church when you're not sure you still belong there, and returned to my chair that didn't scrape. I set my napkin on the table like a flag you don't need anymore. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Adrian tried to retake the room. He made a joke about clumsiness and grandfathers. The partners didn't give it back to him. The wives looked at their hands. Leela gathered the fallen cake with a towel like she was erasing a crime scene. I didn't eat another bite. I kept my eyes on the glass patio door, where my reflection stood up straighter than it had in years. And in that reflection, I recognized a man I used to be, patient, dangerous, very, very calm. The show went on. They always do. But the stage had tilted, and Adrian Price felt it in his shoes. He smiled through it. He always smiles. But he stopped meeting my eyes. That was the first night I let him see the ending. He just didn't know which act we were in. 3 weeks before the dinner party, I learned something that split my world clean in two. It began with a phone call from my daughter Lila. She was exhausted. I could hear it in the soft drag of her voice. Her firm had pushed up a presentation, and she was flying to Chicago the next morning. "Dad," she said, "could you stop by the house tomorrow? The contractor's supposed to fix the guest bathroom leak. Adrian will be in court all day. I'd feel better if someone was around." Of course I said yes. It was the kind of small favor that meant everything to me. Proof that my daughter still needed me in some way, still trusted me enough to hand me a key to her home. I drove over that afternoon. The house was quiet but not peaceful, sterile in a way that made my stomach tighten. I'd noticed it before. No family photos anymore, no cozy clutter. Just Adrian's taste everywhere. Cold art, angular furniture, glass and chrome. Even the smell was different, his cologne, not hers. I made a pot of coffee, sat down with a book, and waited for the contractor who, apparently, had no respect for schedules. The minutes dragged on. By 2:30 I'd read the same paragraph 4 times when I heard the lock turn. The door opened, not the contractor. Adrian's voice filled the hallway, confident, casual, practiced. But underneath, there was something softer. Another voice answered him, a woman's, higher, lighter, unfamiliar. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe a colleague stopping by, maybe someone from his office. I wasn't the suspicious type, at least not anymore. But then she laughed. It was the kind of laugh that doesn't belong in a marriage. It was playful, private, meant for closed doors. My gut tightened. "Are you sure she won't be back?" the woman asked. "Teasing. Not until tomorrow," Adrian replied, his tone warm. Indulgent in a way I'd never once heard him use with my daughter. My body went cold. I froze. Instincts kicking in like muscle memory from another life. Observe. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't exist. I slid behind the sofa, my knees protesting, heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I felt ridiculous, an old man hiding in his daughter's living room, but some part of me knew I had to stay unseen. If I confronted him now, I'd lose everything I might learn later. The footsteps drew closer. I could see their shadows through the slats of the entryway mirror. Adrian's hand brushed hers. She giggled. Then came the sound that ended all doubt, a kiss. "I've missed this," she whispered. "I know, Camilla," he murmured back. "Soon we'll make real plans." Real plans. The phrase cut through me like shrapnel. In that moment I understood more than I wanted to. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was an affair with intent. They weren't sneaking around just for passion. They were planning a future. My daughter's husband was building a new life, and she wasn't in it. My first instinct was fury. The kind that makes your hands tremble. I wanted to storm out, drag him by the collar, make him look me in the eye and explain how he dared to betray her. But the soldier in me, The man who'd spent decades studying human behavior, gathering intel, waiting for the right moment, knew better. You don't attack when you're blind. You don't strike without knowing the field. You wait. You watch. You gather. So I stayed there, crouched behind that sofa, my breath shallow, my mind already forming a plan. I memorized her name, her voice, the way she said real plans. I listened as they walked upstairs, laughing softly, oblivious to the fact that the walls were no longer keeping their secret. When the front door finally opened again and closed behind them, I stepped out, knees stiff, throat dry. I stood in the middle of that cold, beautiful house and felt my heart harden into something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was arrogance. He'd been careless in his own home, confident I was too old, too harmless to notice. He thought I was invisible, and that was his first mistake, because that afternoon, in the silence that followed their laughter, I made a quiet promise to myself. Adrian Price had underestimated the wrong man. When I left the house that afternoon, I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the car with the engine off, hands gripping the wheels so tight the skin went white. For 20 minutes I didn't move. I just stared at the dashboard, listening to the sound of my own pulse echoing in the silence. Outside, the street was calm. Kids riding bikes, a sprinkler ticking somewhere down the block, but inside me, something had shifted. I'd seen betrayal before, in war zones, in briefing rooms, in the eyes of men who said one thing and did another. But betrayal had never worn the face of my son-in-law. It had never been aimed straight at my daughter. The question gnawed at me. Do I tell her now? Lila deserved the truth. She always did. But I knew my daughter, knew how she loved, how she blamed herself for every crack in that marriage. She worked herself to exhaustion trying to fix a man who had no intention of being fixed. If I walked into her office and dropped what I'd seen onto her desk, it would crush her. No warning, no proof, no shield. That's when the old voice came back, the one I thought I'd left behind when I retired from military intelligence. It spoke in the calm, steady rhythm of old training, patience, timing, precision. Information isn't power unless it's complete, verified, and delivered at exactly the right moment. I'd spent years teaching that to younger men, spies, analysts, soldiers, people who thought emotion was strategy. It never is. Emotion clouds the field. So I told myself, don't act on anger, act on certainty. So I carried the silence. At night when Lila called me after work, her voice would sound thin and tired. She'd talk about deadlines, clients, and always circle back to the same painful thought: Dad, maybe I work too much. Maybe that's why Adrian feels distant. Maybe I've become difficult. Every word was a knife turned in my chest. I wanted to shout, it's not you, it's him. But instead, I said what fathers are supposed to say. You're doing your best, sweetheart. I'm proud of you, because that's what she needed then. Comfort, not chaos. But I started to see the cracks differently. When Adrian bragged about his late nights at the firm, I wondered which hotel he was really in. When he joked about Lila's stress, I noticed the relief on his face. Relief that she wasn't paying attention to him. And when he looked at me across the dinner table with that smug little smirk, I smiled back. I wanted him to believe I was still the harmless father-in-law in the corner. What he didn't realize was that I was already cataloguing his every move. The tone of his voice, the timing of his absences, the receipts he left half crumpled on the counter. Every lie has a rhythm. I just needed to learn his. The silence grew heavy. It pressed against my chest when I woke up and followed me like a shadow when I walked through the grocery store or read the morning paper. But silence, I've learned, is a tool. In the field, silence lets you hear the whispers others try to hide. It gives you time to see patterns that noise disguises. And at home, in that quiet suburban war zone, silence gave me something even more valuable. Time to think, to plan, to sharpen. Adrian believed I was invisible. That was his comfort. But what he didn't know was that invisibility is an advantage. It's how men like me survive. I wasn't going to run into this war half-armed. Not against a man like Adrian Price, because this time I wasn't just defending my daughter's happiness, I was defending her truth. And truth, once I decided to use it, would hit harder than any bullet ever could. Silence alone wouldn't protect my daughter. Silence needed an ally. Proof, receipts, documents that couldn't be argued away. That's when I called Mateo Cruz. He and I had served together in Germany decades ago, long before grey streaked our hair and the world started mistaking us for harmless. We were analysts back then, trained to notice what others ignored. I trusted Mateo more than most people I'd ever known. Two things about him had never changed. He was loyal and he was thorough. After leaving the army, he had turned his knack for observation into a career, private investigations, mostly domestic work, though I'd heard whispers that corporations hired him too when things got messy. He didn't advertise, didn't need to. Word of mouth kept him busy, and when he took a case, he left no stone unturned. We met at a diner just outside town, the kind of place where old men nursing bottomless cups of coffee didn't draw attention. The neon sign buzzed in the window, flickering between open and ope. He slid into the booth across from me, a faint grin under his mustache. "Long time, Ned," he said, reaching across for a firm handshake. "You look the same, just grumpier," I smirked. "War doesn't change people. Life after it does," he nodded, leaning back. "I hear you've got family trouble." "More than trouble," I told him, lowering my voice. "Adrian's cheating on my daughter. I saw it myself, but I need more. A full picture. Something no lawyer or judge could dismiss." He didn't flinch. Mateo never did. He pulled out a small notepad and started scribbling, his handwriting neat and slanted like it always had been during briefings. "You got a name?" "Camila Torres," I said. His eyebrow lifted slightly. "You caught that much?" "I catch more than people think," I told him. "I just need someone who can help me catch everything." He gave a short nod. "You'll have it." Within a few days, he was already sending me updates, each message another cut into what little trust I'd had left in Adrian Price, hotel receipts, all under corporate expense accounts, dinners at steakhouses where the tabs ran high enough to feed a family for a week, jewelry bought at Tiffany's, designer handbags, things I never once saw on Lila. The first few pieces of evidence hurt like splinters under the skin. But the next discovery was a knife to the heart. Mateo called one night, his tone different, sharper, colder. "You'd better sit down for this one, Ned." He'd found in corporation papers, Adrian and Camilla had registered a new LLC together. A consulting firm. It was clean on paper, legal even, but the numbers didn't lie. Transfers from joint accounts, unexplained withdrawals, money moving into that business in small, careful amounts. They were siphoning funds out of Lila's life, dollar by dollar, under the guise of business expenses. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was theft. It was betrayal with strategy. He was using my daughter's hard-earned money, the same money she thought was building their future, to build his future without her. When I met Mateo, again to go over the full file, he set the folder on the diner table with a dull thud that made both of us glance around. The thing was thick enough to break a table leg. Inside were photos, receipts, company registrations, timestamps, phone logs, everything. "You've got him, Ned," he said quietly, sliding the folder toward me. "This is airtight. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" I opened the folder, flipped through the pages and stared at the evidence, page after page of deceit, documented in black and white. For a long time, I didn't answer. I thought of my daughter sitting in her office late at night, sending Adrian messages he ignored, defending him to her friends, believing she just needed to try harder. Finally, I closed the folder. "I want her to see the truth," I said. "And I want him to pay for underestimating me." Mateo smiled faintly. "You always did believe in clean endings." "Not clean," I said, pushing the file toward my side of the table. "Just honest." He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Then I'd hate to be in that man's shoes when you're done." As I drove home that night, the file sat on the passenger seat, heavy as a loaded weapon. The road was dark, the hum of the tires steady. And for the first time since this began, I felt something dangerous, calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Because now, I wasn't just a father, I was an investigator again, and Adrian Price's reckoning had officially begun. Adrian's cruelty didn't always come dressed as insults. Sometimes it wore a suit and charm, the kind that dazzled strangers and disarmed rooms. That was his real power. He didn't need to shout or strike. He just needed to twist reality until people thanked him for doing it. To the partners at his firm, Adrian Price was the kind of man they wanted their sons to be, sharp, polished, and endlessly confident. He had a way of controlling the rhythm of a room, steering conversation like a current only he understood. They'd laugh at his jokes, nod at his insights, and call him a natural leader. He made sharks clap. As they like to say, that mask never slipped in public, but behind closed doors. In the quiet corners of his marriage, the tone was different. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, just small, precise manipulations that cut deeper because they left no marks. He didn't call Lila names. He didn't have to. Instead, he questioned her memory of things. "I never said that, Lila. You must be tired." He undermined her instincts. "Are you sure that's the right way? You tend to overthink." He made her apologize for feeling she had every right to feel. It was gaslighting in its purest form, cruelty that hides behind reason. You start doubting your own reflection before you ever doubt the man standing beside you. I watched it play out in the smallest of moments, the kind most people wouldn't notice unless they were trained to. At a dinner one evening, we were seated with some of Adrian's colleagues. Lila, always trying to make him proud, started telling a story about a marketing pitch she'd led, one that had landed her firm a major client. She was proud, her face lit with that spark I used to see when she was a kid. But halfway through, Adrian interrupted her with a smirk that could slice through steel. "That's cute, honey," he said, tilting his wine glass. "But what our clients really care about is results, not creativity." The table laughed. A soft, polite chuckle, people following his lead. Lila forced a small laugh too, the kind you give when you've been publicly cut, but can't bleed in front of witnesses. Her voice faltered after that. She didn't finish her story. I saw her shoulders drop, just an inch. But it was enough. He'd taken something from her, not in a big, dramatic way, but in a small, everyday cruelty that chipped away at who she was. And that's how men like Adrian win. Not by being monstrous, but by being believable. The world looks at them and sees charm. Their wives look at them and see hope. The people who know better, we see the predator underneath. He'd trained her to doubt herself so thoroughly that even kindness from others embarrassed her. When I'd tell her she looked beautiful, she'd shake her head and say, "Dad, you're just saying that." When I'd tell her she did a great job at work, she'd shrug and say, "Adrian thinks I talk too much about it." Every compliment I gave had to fight through the noise of his quiet cruelty, and I knew that if I ever confronted him directly, he'd spin it like he spun everything else. He'd smile, say I'd misunderstood, maybe even laugh about the sensitive old man who reads too much into things. That's when I realized something important. The file Mateo had built wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just ammunition, it was salvation, because Adrian's power came from control of perception, of truth, of narrative. The only way to break a man like that is with proof so undeniable that even his charm can't rewrite it. That file in my possession was more than paper. It was justice in waiting, and soon the man who prided himself on being untouchable was going to find out exactly how dangerous silence, patience, and truth could be in the hands of someone who had nothing left to lose. The night of the dinner party had already been heavy, but when I replay it in my mind, every detail slows down, like the reel of a film burned into my memory. Adrian was in his element, perched at the head of the table, spinning stories about his promotion as if he'd personally bent the world into shape. The partners ate it up, their polite laughter bouncing off the marble walls. Lila floated between us, refilling glasses, smiling on command. Her laugh was brittle, the sound of glassware clinking rather than joy. I had already endured the digs, the little knives disguised as jokes. But dessert was different. Dessert was personal. Leela had made chocolate cake, the one her mother used to bake. It wasn't just a sweet ending. It was memory, tradition, and love wrapped in frosting. She served me a thick slice. I saw the flicker of pride in her eyes when I took my first bite. That was the moment Adrian chose. He was in the middle of an anecdote, glass in hand, playing to his audience. He threw his arm wide for emphasis, his cuff brushing mine. My plate spun, clattered, fell. Cake smeared across the pristine marble, a brown and white mess against a floor too clean to forgive accidents. A gasp ran down the table. A partner's wife put her hand to her mouth. Lila's fork hung in the air. Adrian paused. And then the smirk. That smirk I had seen 100 times. The one that told me he believed he was untouchable. He raised his glass. "Well, Edward," he said, voice dripping with mock sympathy, "if you want to finish your dinner, you'll have to lick it off the floor." The room fell silent. No polite laughter this time. Just the sound of people holding their breath. I stood slowly. My joints protested, but I didn't rush. I smoothed my jacket, straightened my shoulders, and walked the length of the table. Not to clean the mess, not to argue, just to stand close enough for Adrian to see that his little theatre had just shifted stages. I leaned in, close enough for him to smell the coffee on my breath, and whispered, "I know everything." The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His smile faltered, his eyes darted, his brain calculating. What did I mean? His affair? The money? The business? The truth is, I didn't have to clarify. Men like Adrian fear the size of the secret, not the secret itself. He tried to recover, forcing a chuckle, tossing out a line about grandpa jokes. No one laughed, not even his partners. Leela froze, her hands tightening around her napkin like it was rope. I turned, gave the room a polite nod, and sat back down. I didn't touch another bite. The balance of power had shifted in that moment, and everyone at that table felt it, especially Adrian. The morning after the dinner party, I woke before dawn. Sleep had never come. My mind had replayed the sound of his voice, those 6 words, "If you want dinner, lick it off the floor," over and over. But instead of burning me up with humiliation, they did something else. They focused me. For years, Adrian had treated me like an aging relic, a polite decoration in the corner of his carefully curated life. To him, I was a man past my usefulness, someone to mock quietly when my back was turned. But that morning, as the first grey light crept across my kitchen counter, I realized something. I wasn't powerless. I was invisible, and invisibility in the right hands is an advantage. At 5:30 I brewed a pot of coffee, black and bitter. I sat at my kitchen table and spread out the file Matteo had built for me. Receipts, bank statements, credit transfers, photographs, incorporation papers with both Adrian's and Camilla's names. The evidence wasn't just a story, it was an indictment. It wasn't infidelity anymore. It was embezzlement, fraud, and betrayal, all disguised as ambition. He wasn't just sleeping with another woman. He was building a future with her, using my daughter's money. I traced my finger along the paper trail, imagining his arrogance as he moved money in small, deliberate amounts, thinking no one would notice. But I had noticed. And now I was done being patient. I called Matteo. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly, calm. "You ready?" "Ready," I said. "We're not gathering anymore. We're moving." By noon, we met again at the same diner off Route 18, the kind of place where the blinds are always half closed and no one cares about who's talking in the corner booth. Matteo already had a new folder waiting for me, thicker than before. He pushed it across the table. Fresh from this morning. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. Inside were photos. Adrian and Camilla together at a real estate office, smiling, hands brushing as they looked over floor plans. "A new home, suburban, under her name. He's getting bold," I said. Matteo nodded. "That's what ego does. The higher they think they stand, the more exposed they really are." I flipped through the photos, every image a spark in the fire building in my chest. Lila was still at work every night, losing sleep over a marriage she thought she was ruining. And all the while, her husband was blueprinting his escape with someone else. "This is airtight," Matteo said, sipping his coffee. "If it goes to divorce court, he won't have a leg to stand on. You've got everything, dates, documents, transactions. You even have intent," I nodded slowly. "Timing matters, though. I can't just throw this at Lila out of nowhere. Adrian's good at twisting stories. He'll spin this if I give him time. She needs to see the whole picture, and she needs to hear it from me, not him." Matteo studied me quietly. "You always did know when to wait, Ned," he said. "Just don't wait too long. Men like him, when they sense trouble, they start covering tracks fast." He was right. The longer I waited, the more dangerous it became. But I also knew that truth delivered too soon can wound deeper than the lie ever did. I needed Lila strong enough to stand when she saw what he'd done. When we finished, I folded the file carefully and slid it into a plain manila envelope. I set it on the passenger seat beside me as I drove home, like a loaded weapon I wasn't ready to fire yet. The hum of the engine was steady, but my thoughts raced ahead. For the first time since that dinner, since that plate hit the floor, I didn't feel humiliated. I didn't feel old. I felt something else, something Adrian never expected me to feel again: control. And that's the thing about quiet men like me. When we finally move, we don't make noise, we make impact. The quiet counterattack had begun. I chose a café downtown. Not too busy, not too quiet. Just enough noise to give us privacy, without the weight of silence pressing in. It was the kind of place where people spoke in low voices, and the hum of the espresso machine drowned out confessions. I got there early. The manila envelope sat beside me on the booth seat like a loaded gun. I wasn't sure I wanted to fire. The evidence inside was cold, factual, impossible to deny, and yet I knew once it left my hands, it would burn everything in her life to the ground. When Lila walked in, I saw the exhaustion before she even smiled. Her navy suit was crisp, her hair pinned neatly back, but her eyes told another story, red at the edges, darkened from too many sleepless nights. She hugged me quickly, the way busy people do, and slid into the booth. "Thanks for this, Dad," she said, exhaling. "I needed to get out of the office. It's been a week." We ordered coffee. She stirred hers absently, watching the swirl of cream like it might give her answers. I let her talk first. She needed it. She spoke about deadlines, about how Adrian had been working late again, and about how maybe, just maybe, she was the one pushing him away. "Sometimes I wonder if I've become too difficult," she said softly. "He says I'm distracted, that I don't make time for him." Every word was a knife. She wasn't distracted, she was devoted. She had given everything to that marriage, her time, her patience, her youth. And still, he made her feel like she was the problem. I swallowed hard, watching her talk. I'd waited weeks for this moment, rehearsed it in my head 100 times. But no matter how many ways I tried to phrase it, it always sounded like a gunshot waiting to go off. I leaned forward. "Lila," I said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about Adrian." Her fingers froze on the coffee cup. The light in her eyes flickered. Hope, fear, something in between. "Dad, what kind of something?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached down, picked up the manila envelope and placed it gently on the table between us. "3 weeks ago," I began, "you asked me to check on the house. Adrian came home, but he wasn't alone. I didn't want to believe what I saw, so I asked Matteo to investigate. He did, and this is what he found." She stared at the envelope like it was a living thing. Her hands trembled as she slid it closer. For a moment she didn't open it. Maybe she thought that if she didn't, she could still pretend her life wasn't about to split in two. But finally, she peeled it open and began to pull out the contents: dates, receipts, bank transfers, hotel charges. Each page another blow. Her face changed as she read. First confusion, then disbelief, then the dawning horror that comes when the puzzle pieces start to fit together. When she reached the photographs, Adrian and Camilla sitting close in a restaurant, holding hands across a white tablecloth, she stopped breathing. Her lips trembled. "He's going to leave me." I shook my head slowly. No, sweetheart. He's already left you. You just didn't know it. She pressed her palm to her mouth, her shoulders curling inward as tears welled in her eyes. How long have you known? Long enough to bring you proof, I said quietly, so you'll never doubt yourself again. Her eyes found mine, wet, red, broken. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted to protect you from the kind of pain that can't be undone, I said. But now, you deserve the truth, no matter how much it hurts. She nodded faintly, though I could see her trying to hold herself together, her breathing shallow, her fingers gripping the papers like a lifeline. This isn't your fault, Lila, I said firmly. Don't let him make you think it is. Her tears fell freely then, quiet, not hysterical, the kind that come from exhaustion rather than shock. She looked down at the evidence, then back at me. What do I do now? She whispered. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. You take your time. You don't rush, you plan. Just like he did, but smarter. She looked at me for a long moment. The daughter who once needed me to fix broken toys was now sitting across from me, holding the ruins of her own life. And I realized I couldn't fix this for her, but I could help her rebuild it. As she packed the papers back into the envelope, her movements grew steadier. The tremor in her hands began to fade. The lie was dead now, and in its place, something harder and stronger was being born. For the first time in months, I saw her sit up straight, her chin lifted. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "He doesn't know it yet, Dad, but I'm done." And right then, I knew. She was ready for war. The first time I saw steel in my daughter's eyes again was 3 days after the café. She came to my apartment, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no performance smile. She looked tired, yes, but underneath the fatigue was something harder, sharper. "I've been thinking," she said, setting her bag on the table. "Adrian doesn't get to write the ending to my story. Not anymore." I listened as she laid out her plan, surprising me with her clarity. She'd already spoken to a divorce attorney, one Matteo had quietly recommended. A woman known for dismantling men who thought they were too clever to be caught. "I don't want to tip my hand yet," Lila said. "He can't know I'm preparing, so I'll keep doing what I always do. Work late, keep the house running, smile when he expects me to. But in the background, I'll gather everything. Bank statements, bills, contracts. If he tries to hide assets, I'll already have copies." That was the moment I realized my daughter wasn't broken. She was angry, focused, and ready to fight. The shame he had pressed onto her shoulders was peeling off piece by piece, and underneath was the Lila I remembered, the one who never gave up. Adrian must have sensed it. The next time I saw him, he was restless, twitchy, watching me with narrowed eyes, like a man trying to measure an opponent he didn't understand. He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't just fighting me anymore. He was fighting her too. The balance had shifted, and Adrian Price had no idea what storm was about to fall on him. The night it all came to a head was colder than usual. I remember because I sat in my truck outside their house, engine off, watching the glow of the kitchen lights through the blinds. My role wasn't to intervene, that was Lila's choice. My role was to be close enough if she needed me. Inside, she had staged the scene with precision. The kitchen table was laid out, not with dinner, but with evidence. Receipts, credit card statements, photographs, business documents with Adrian's name tied to Camilla's. The manila folders looked almost like a courtroom exhibit. When Adrian came home, he was in high spirits, whistling as he hung up his coat. He carried the smell of whiskey and perfume that wasn't my daughter's. Lila sat at the table, silent, waiting. "What's this?" he asked, half smiling as he glanced at the papers. "A presentation?" Her voice was steady, controlled. "Sit down, Adrian," he chuckled. "Lila, if this is about me working late, it's about her," she cut in. Her finger tapped the photo of him and Camilla holding hands across a restaurant table. For a moment, he froze. Then the performance began. He laughed, waved his hand. She's just a colleague. You know how things look." "Stop," Lila said, sharper now. She slid another document forward, the incorporation papers for their joint business. "Do colleagues start companies together? Do they use my money to fund it?" His mask cracked. His jaw tightened. He reached for anger, for control. "You had me followed? You violated my privacy?" She didn't flinch. You violated our marriage. I'm filing for divorce. The words landed like a gavel strike. For the first time, Adrian Price, the man who thrived on control, who built his life on silencing others, was the one left speechless. That night, my daughter won back her voice. When the papers were filed, Adrian's mask cracked for good. At first, he tried to fight. He stormed into negotiations with the same swagger he carried into courtrooms, convinced that his charm and cleverness could spin the truth. But charm doesn't stand up against bank statements, hotel receipts, or photographs that show your hand laced with another woman's. Lila's attorney, a sharp, unflinching woman, dismantled him piece by piece. Every charge, every wire transfer, every dollar funneled into his secret business with Camilla was laid out like evidence in a trial. The more he denied, the more foolish he looked. He tried to play the victim next, claimed Lila was vindictive, too career-focused, that their marriage had been failing for years, but the documents told a different story. He'd been siphoning money from joint accounts, using Lila's overtime pay to fund hotel suites and jewelry for another woman. The settlement didn't just strip him of leverage, it stripped him of his narrative. Lila walked away with her retirement intact, reimbursement for the money he'd stolen, and most importantly, her dignity. And something else changed, something beyond contracts and bank accounts. I watched my daughter stand taller. She laughed more, the hollow sound replaced with something warm and real. She stopped apologizing for things she never needed to apologize for. At work, she earned a promotion. In life, she rediscovered herself. As for Adrian, the man who once humiliated me at his dinner table, he was left scrambling. A puppet with his strings cut. It's strange, the way time rearranges the weight of things. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat across from Lila in her new apartment, a space that finally looked like hers. Warm colors, shelves of books, framed photos that Adrian would have hidden away. She was different now. Lighter, sharper, alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. Over dinner she told me almost casually that she'd been promoted again. Senior director. And the best part? She said with a grin. I didn't have to dim myself down so someone else could shine. I felt pride swell in my chest. Not just because she was successful, but because she finally knew her worth. Months later, she introduced me to David, a colleague who treated her the way a man should, with respect, curiosity, and kindness. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to outshine her. He simply listened. And that was more valuable than anything Adrian had ever offered. I saw Adrian once more by chance. A restaurant downtown. He was alone, nursing a drink, looking older than his years. His suit didn't sit right anymore. His shoulders slumped. He caught my eye, offered a stiff nod. I nodded back. That was all. I didn't need to gloat. His own choices had written his ending. As I drove home that night, I thought about the dinner party where this all began. The moment he told me to lick food off the floor, he thought he was breaking me down. What he really did was remind me of something I'd forgotten. I am not powerless. Revenge didn't come with shouting or fists. It came with patience, proof, and timing. It came with helping my daughter rebuild her life while Adrian lost his. At 68, I learned something I wish I'd known earlier. It's never too late to stand up for the people you love. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't loud at all. It's watching justice unfold quietly while you and the ones you love finally breathe free.